Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Warner, and I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago. And thank you for joining us tonight. We've got one of Chicago's top chefs who's been around for a long time, and he's going to give you his overview of what's happened to Chicago's food in the time that he's been involved for over 35 years in Chicago's food scene. And our chef tonight is Dean Zanella. I've had the honor of taking several classes from him recently at his wonderful cooking school on West Belmont, um, Tutore Cooking School, Italian cooking school. I'm going to ask him later on to tell a little bit about this wonderful program. He has guest chefs come in and teach, and it's just outstanding. And briefly about Chef Zanella. He's a founder and instructor at Chicago's, again, Tutore Italian Cooking School, and he brings years and years of experience to this as a chef. He's worked at some of Chicago's finest restaurants and knows intimately some of the top chefs, including the late Charlie Trotter. He worked at Gordon, who was a speaker for us. Uh, and he's helmed such wonderful eateries as 312 Chicago and Rhapsody Restaurant at the Chicago Symphony Center. And he's a strong supporter of Chicago's Green City Market. So let's bring his toque to the table. And Chef Zanella, can you give us your skinny on what's going on in Chicago and how it's changed in the food scene? Thank you.
Sure. Um, so thank you all for coming. I'm going to tell you what, again, this is my own personal observations of what I've seen. But when I came here in 1990 and early on, it was definitely everything was very similar in the fact that fine dining restaurants had to have white tablecloths. There wasn't a lot of tasting menus, or if they were, they would follow the French rules with the eight-course degustation. And that was kind of it. I mean, everybody seemed to have almost like everybody had duck on the menu, everybody had lamb chops on the menu, everybody had a filet mignon. It was very similar, even though the chefs would do different things. That's just how I felt about it. It just seemed different. And then right around this was 1990 when I moved here. Shortly thereafter, it all changed. And, people give a lot of different people credit. Charlie Trotter had a lot to do with that. But there was other chefs that had credit to do it. I mean, Rick Bayless elevated Mexican cuisine at a time when people thought like, oh, a taqueria. And I heard plenty of people when I would tell them how great Frontera was, they would be like, well, yeah, but in Texas we have that everywhere and it's cheap. Why is it so expensive here? I don't think the Mexican restaurants in Texas are that good. I mean, they are some of them, but they're not at the quality that Rick was doing. Um, there was other people, Paul Kahan came on in, you know, the later 90s with his wonderful restaurant Blackbird and, changing the whole narrative of like, you have to have white tablecloths. Now all of a sudden you could have fine dining and you didn't have to have white tablecloths. Um, there was just so many things that changed and happened quick. I know Gail's on this Chef Gail Gand is on here. And back when she had Trio, I remember eating there, and that was the first time I had, with my tasting menu, I had three different desserts. And it wasn't like, oh, that's a lot of dessert. They're just showing off. It made sense in the progression. Before we come, you might get a little sorbet, and then you get dessert, and all of a sudden you're getting three different desserts, and they all worked in the tasting. So breaking it up and not just saying like, oh, I have to do this was wonderful. Um, there was just so many chefs that did that, and right about that time, the late '90s, um, that's when we started really getting hard into working with local chefs, local farmers here in Chicago. A lot of the chefs before then, not too many of us did. Part of it was because it was hard. You hook on with a farmer and say, "Yeah, I'd love to use some of your pork." And like, well, you got to buy the whole pig. And it's not like now where customers are willing to try everything. Back then, it's like you could sell pork chops, pork tenderloin, and pork loin. And that was pretty much it. Now you can cure your own guanciale, cure your own pork belly, serve pork belly, uh, just use a whole snout to tail thing. it can be done easily now. Back then, it was a little bit tougher to get people to like say, "Oh, we're selling pork shanks tonight." No, I think I'm okay with that. So the evolution of the diner has helped the chefs evolve too, because if people aren't willing to eat what we're cooking, then we can't evolve as chefs. We can say like, "Wow, this dish is amazing," but if nobody's buying it, you can't keep it on the menu. So I think that goes hand in hand, believe it or not, with the TV Food Network. The TV Food Network, even though like many chefs, we have some issues with it, um, it did a lot to expand people's minds as opposed to like what's out there. You know, Mario Batali came on and he started doing some of these really out there crazy Italian dishes to us, to us Americans, when that's just what they eat every day in Italy. And, you know, he really showed people like, hey, this is Italian cuisine. And other chefs were doing the same thing on that Food Network. So TV Food Network helped us a lot. Um, and there was just a real good amount of chefs coming in here, putting their name, putting their stamp on it. And that's at the explosion of the, as they like to call it, celebrity chefs. Because before you talked about restaurants pre 90 in Chicago, you would talk about Gordon, you talk about Jimmy's Place, you might talk about some of the four-star restaurants, but they didn't always have the chef's name attached to it. And then Charlie Trotter came on, and then True, Rick Tremonto and Gail Gann. You know, everything had to do with the chef again. And the chef was the leading driver of the restaurant, not just a cog in the wheel. And that was a very big, I think, step forward for the city because now if you went to a restaurant and the chef's name was involved, you were expecting something special and not just the same menu that you saw at maybe a restaurant across the street. They had foie with, you know, poached pears, and this one has it with poached persimmons. You know, it changed up, and everybody had to put their own stamp on it, and not just changing one or two things around in the dish. Um, what else about how we've evolved? The other main evolution, I think, another person that doesn't get as much credit, and he's been around forever, is Chef Arun. The Thai restaurant Arun's. He was the first one to do, I believe, a tasting menu that wasn't European cuisine or modern American. He was doing Thai food and he was doing a tasting menu. It still is. And I ate there 2 years ago and it's still wonderful. So, I mean, I know some of us probably forget about some of these restaurants because they've been around forever. If you have a chance, go to Arun's. He's doing wonderful. And I think that really helped the city because then people started trying different cuisines and it started elevating the non-European cuisines, whether it's Rick at Mexican food with Rick Bayless, Arun with his Thai. Um, then you know you could people be willing to spend more than just say $10 on an entree, $20 an entree because it's an ethnic restaurant, and oh, you know I can get that inexpensive over there. You know we can start elevating Greek food. We can start Italian food isn't just you know meatballs and red sauce. It's more. So we can really elevate the those wonderful foods. Now, where what else I've seen in evolution? Again, this is so much food scene, the plating of the food. I mean, how many chefs now get certain plates made for certain dishes? And that was never the case. And it became as much of a show in a way, as much as the food was still the central point, but it became more than just we're going out to dinner and we're going to get served on a plate and it's going to look pretty. It's going to have some flair to it, some showmanship to it. And I think that's wonderful. It lets the chefs work with their creativity. And what I like about Chicago is Chicagoans are pretty accepting to that, more so than any other town in the Midwest. If you look at it, you go outside of Chicago, think of Midwestern towns. Would something like an Avec fly there? Would people be like, "Ooh, this is kind of crazy. I don't want to eat that," or, you know, do they even eat that type of cuisine, say, in St. Louis or wherever. Chicagoans are willing to accept that. And I think that helps with our international airport and the traveling. You know, people travel to Italy, they go to France, or they'll go to Southeast Asia and they come back and they want to experience those cuisines, and not just in the old fashioned way, the Italian American way, or the classic French way. It's like, hey, how can we make this even better? With that being said, that's what I think has happened. So where we're going right now in Chicago, it's limitless. I think there's so many talented chefs in Chicago. Look at all the wonderful restaurants we're having here. I know Michelin came out right now, and some people like, wow, it's kind of a bloodbath in Chicago. We've lost stars, restaurants no longer Michelin stars. We lost a bunch of bib gourmands. I'm not sure. I don't really follow that rating system as much as other people. I still think the restaurants here are wonderful. I think the chefs are super talented. And some restaurants that don't ever get mentioned in there. I just ate at Virtue down in Hyde Park with Chef Erik Williams, and what he's doing is amazing. I love the food I had there. It was a great menu. And, you know, there's just tons of great restaurants in the city. There's a little empanada place by here. It's called Omarcitos, and little Omarcitos Little Latin Cafe. Very small menu. He's cooking out of basically a little old shipping container, and it's so tasty. He has like 500 reviews, and they're all 5 stars. Usually, at some point, somebody's going to give him 1 star. Everybody gives him 5 stars, and he deserves it. So you got that spectrum, and that's what I love about Chicago, where you get the inexpensive Omars, and then you get to high-end, wonderful tasting restaurants. So we've got the whole everything in between. And it's up to, I always say, it's up to the Chicago diners to where we can go. It's not up to the chefs because we have the talent, and now we have the supply chains. You know what I mean by that is 20, 30 years ago, it was hard to get certain products here, whether it was Calabrian chilies or certain fish, you know, something besides just swordfish, salmon, tuna. You know, like, hey, I want to put mackerel on the menu. I want fresh sardines. We can get that now. We couldn't get them like 20, 30 years ago unless you had to pre-order it and then hope people buy it. People are more accepting. And that's what we need out of the Chicago diners is to kind of push our chefs by accepting, you know, what we're doing and trying it. As long as the food is good, you know, come back, tell your friends about it, because you can have these great restaurants, but if nobody's showing up and nobody's eating it, it doesn't help. Um, so where we can go in this city, it's limitless. And then, it's like I said, I never want to discount what the TV Food Network did to bring Chicago and the country as a whole, like, help advance it. Because people still come and talk to me all the time and be like, oh, I saw this dish on the Food Network. And it might be something one of us tried years ago and nobody ever had, and they never wanted to try it. But now they see it on the TV Food Network and you need it. Like a dish like porchetta. It's on every Italian menu, it seems, in the city. It's kind of gone away a little bit now. But 4 or 5 years ago, if you were in an Italian restaurant, you had to have porchetta on the menu. 30 years ago, I ran a porchetta special when I ran a restaurant in the Loop, in Gold Coast called Grappa. I couldn't give it away. It became staff meal. Nobody knew what it was. So that helped a lot. Um, again, the evolution of all our chefs really working with the farmers and getting the Green City market going, it helped because now people are going there and seeing like, oh, asparagus is in season. Maybe I shouldn't ask for that in December, you know, where before it seemed like you had to have asparagus on your menu year round. People started learning that, hey, chefs are cooking in season. And that's the way we should eat because it's better for our bodies. You're getting things that are nutritionally more valuable in season than out of it. Um, Scott asked me who were some of the chefs that really pushed us to the next level. I'll give you some names that I can think of, and forgive me if I omitted anybody. Obviously, I mentioned Charlie and Rick and Gail. Um, Rick Bayless again, Paul Kahan at Blackbird, Sean McLean when he left Trio. He opened up his wonderful restaurant Spring. I think that was a wonderful restaurant and got a lot of accolades when it was run. What I loved about that restaurant was it was fine dining, but it felt more on a casual level. It wasn't like, and that was the breaking down of it. You could go to these restaurants that were fine dining and you could go in a pair of jeans and a nice shirt and feel comfortable, as opposed to having to wear blazer, jackets required and all that. Um, and it allowed the chefs to be creative, but not have to be so like on the cutting edge where it's like, okay, we have to do this tasting menu. We're going to be creative. They're going to come in. They're going to have 3 courses. Let's put our best foot forward on these dishes. Um, and chefs now, I mean, God, like I said, there's so many. I'm going to miss so many. Stephanie Izard, Erik Williams down at Virtue. Um, I love what Kevin Hickey's doing at the Duck Inn. I better not forget Carrie Nahabedian. She's doing such amazing food over there, Prandi. And again, I'm missing a ton of chefs. John Mannion, El Chebar. Who would have think that one of the best steakhouses in Chicago would be on an open fire? Um, and he opened another restaurant for Sarah, which is more seafood based, and it's wonderful. Like I said, Chef Arun at Arun's. Oh, what else? I'm trying to think, look over my notes here I had. He asked me about what my involvement was in it. For me, when I became a head chef at Grappa, I wanted to cook Italian food like they were eating in Italy, not necessarily the Italian American cuisine that permeated all the Italian restaurants here in Chicago, especially then in the 90s. And it seemed if you opened a restaurant in the 90s that was Italian, you had to have like this certain staples on the menu. Like you had to have a portobello mushroom appetizer, you had to have a polenta appetizer, you had to have, you know, a gnocchi dish, you had to have X and Y. That's how it felt. And I did that for a bit, and then I said, no, let's change this up because I don't see these dishes when I go to Italy every time. And so I was really trying hard to, bring what I was eating when I go to Italy and be like, okay, this is what I want to cook. But I also learned I had to do that in a certain way because sometimes people would tell me like, this is an Italian. And I'd be like, well, I had it in Milan just last month. So, okay. And then it kind of like went off in my head. I'm like, okay, I can't do it too much. So I put some more quote unquote recognizable dishes on the menu. Then I kept pushing the envelope. And I think that's what a good chef does with his creativity. Start using different cuts. Um, I would do a tortelloni with oxtail in it and do it with mushrooms. And yeah, I'd have my ravioli, my spinach and ricotta ravioli, and people love that. But I was selling just as many of the tortelloni. And people were saying, like, oh, this is Italian food. This is Italian food. And I think that's really helped a lot of these young chefs who are doing Italian. Because if you look at the menus, it's not just red sauce and it's not just, fried calamari. Nothing against those. Those are wonderful. But we don't have to do them in all Italian restaurants. Um, what else? Trying to look over my notes here. Again, he said, where are we headed? And in my opinion, I do think Chicago is in a little bit of a lull. And by that, I mean, some of the restaurants that are coming out now, they're too, again, almost formulaic. Like when I was helping out somebody at an Italian restaurant, I can't name, I was consulting about 2 years ago. Their menu had cacio e pepe, it had carbonara, it had porchetta, it had artichokes alla romana, it had chicken parm. Two other restaurants opened up in the same 6 months I was there, Italian style. They had all those same dishes on it, and that's why I'm saying with the lull, it's like I hope Chicago diners start demanding more than cacio e pepe because it's a wonderful dish, but it shouldn't have to be on every restaurant. But right now, everybody's asking for it. So that's what I mean by Chicagoan diners need to help us. They need to start demanding like, hey, can we have something besides cacio e pepe? It doesn't need to be on every menu. You don't need to eat it 5 times, 6 times a year. Make it at home. It's a simple dish. You used to never see that dish in a restaurant in Italy because that's what people made at their house and it was so simple. But then they're like, oh, the main ingredient for this dish is pasta water, and I give you 1 ounce of olive oil, 1 ounce of cheese, and a little pasta, and I can charge you €20. Okay, I'll start doing that. Good food costs. So I understand why restaurants and restaurateurs are putting it on their menu. I just want to see a little more variety, see a few more things and just like, oh, almost like when the Purple Pig came out, that was a revelation here in Chicago, and I thought it was great. But how many people just started looking at their menu and copying, like, oh, he's doing arancini for an appetizer. I'll do arancini and I'll just change it up and have something different. Just mixing it up and not having the same menus, even though they're not in the same groups. Um, and by that, when I mean for diners helping us, I don't know how many seafood restaurants I've seen here in Chicago fail. And it wasn't through bad food or bad service. It was because we're not really a seafood town. And I wish we'd become a little bit more accepting of that, not just going to this one restaurant because you like the sea bass or you like this. Um, Classic example is Joe's Stone Crab. It's not Joe's Stone Crab here in Chicago, it's Joe's Prime Steaks and Stone Crabs or seafood. Um, we should be a little bit more accepting than just being and having more than just one really great seafood restaurant or two. We should be able to have more than that and just be accepting as diners and going to these places. I think that might be a Midwestern thing, and because of all the people who come visit Chicago, they want to go to steakhouses. I remember 20 years ago when I was working for the Kimpton Group, when I was working at 312 Chicago, they had a restaurant that wasn't doing so well here in Chicago, and they asked me what they should change it over to. I said, it has the look, the feel, you should make it a steakhouse. And the president of our company goes, Dean, doesn't Chicago have enough steakhouses already? I said, about 15 steakhouses ago, yes, but they're all doing well. So if you can't beat them, join them, I guess is what I was saying, but make yours a little different and special. They didn't go that way, and so be it. But I understand why people open steakhouses here in Chicago. I wish that we would, be a little bit more accepting of seafood restaurants and just other restaurants as a whole. What else am I missing over here? Oh, Scott asked me, as far as the chefs, what really set them apart and made them so that they could contribute? And I think whether it was somebody looking to do a simple restaurant or a fine dining, multi-course restaurant, I think what it comes down to is they set their standards high and they maintain them, and they expect it out of the people that work for them. It wasn't just the chef doing everything and then him going around and saying, do this because the chefs became teachers and set the bar high for themselves. And they just made the bar set high for everybody else. And so that really elevated the dining here in Chicago, where it wasn't just, okay, we're going to go down, we're going to sit, and the menu's going to come, the food's going to come, the food's going to come. It became more of a show, and the front of the house took the ball and ran with it. And that's why you'd have these amazing front of the house, from Henriette Trio to what Charlie did to all these other places, Donnie Medea over at Avec and Blackbird back in the day. I mean, just taking service to the next level. And it doesn't just mean clear from the left, serve from the right, whichever way it was. I don't even remember. It was how can we make the guest experience more memorable and more amazing? And that is a big thing. And then with all these chefs that broke the rules, not pairing meat and fish together on certain dishes like they wouldn't do in Italy or some other countries. I love the fact that they had no rules and they weren't afraid to break the rules. Not having just a degustation menu. There was 8 courses and the fish was here, so now the meat's got to follow it. There's an intermezzo. It was like, okay, we're going to do a 15-course tasting. Why? Because I love these dishes and it's going to make sense. Oh, have I talked too long? I hope
No,
I made sense of where Chicago was and where it is now. Like I said, where we're going is limitless. It's not necessarily all up to the chefs. It's up to the diners too, because if you have a great chef that's putting out great food or a great restaurant per se, um, if nobody's going to go there and eat it, then it's going to go by the wayside. And then some of the chefs might cut back on how daring they are because they said, "Ooh, that guy went down. He was too daring. We better put chicken parm back on the menu." Nothing wrong with chicken parm. We just don't need it at 75 different restaurants in the city. Should we open it up to questions now?
well, let me explain.
Sure.
Folks, and I didn't mention this in the beginning, you have been putting questions, our audience, in chat, and that's great. So if anybody has questions, please put them in chat. I'm going to ask a few questions
Okay.
first to start off. And Gail Gand, after I'm through, I'm going to put you on the spot since you're one of Chicago's most historic leading chefs. If you have anything to add, and if you have questions, we'll ask you to actually, we'll unmute you. So we'll ask you to put your plate on the table for this. But Dean, what are you doing now? You're again, you were one of Chicago's outstanding chefs. You still are, but you've opened a cooking school. Are you going to be opening a restaurant again, or been there, done that? But could you tell us about your cooking school? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, I've had several classes at your wonderful place, and I've already signed up for another class coming up. Tell us what you do, why you decided to open a cooking school.
Yeah. I'd been kicking this around in my head for years. I got to be honest, I got tired of the restaurant industry after, I've been cooking in kitchens since 1980 when I got my first job when I was 13 years old. And I just was like, I want to do something different. And I enjoy teaching. And as any chef will tell you, to be a good chef, you have to be a good teacher because no chef can do it all. If I can't teach you not only to replicate my sauce, but why my sauce gets made that way. So in case something happens, they can fix it. You have to teach. A good chef is a good teacher and a mentor. And I've always enjoyed that. And so it really bothers me that people don't cook at home as much. And so we opened this cooking school called Tutore almost 2 years ago, well, year and a half ago, because I want people to come in and learn, and I want them to throw dinner parties at their house, whether it's 2, 3 times a year, hopefully more, because it's fun, and I don't want people, and people aren't going to stop going out to restaurants. They will always go out and support restaurants. That's just how we are as a society, that they will go out and support. But I just want people to go back in their house and cook a little and get that relationship with food that's not just, oh, somebody's going to bring me food. I can create it, I can make it, it's going to be good. And maybe it cuts down on the processed food that people are eating. Um, so I want people to go back and cook because it's fun. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy having dinner parties at my house when my friends come over. And it's more enjoyable than sitting down with 6 or 8 of us at a restaurant because we can sit around and have really good food and have a good time. And everybody can hear each other. We don't care if we get a little loud. It just always seems to be a little more fun than a restaurant. So I love the fact that when people come and take our class, and then I say, okay, now are you comfortable making pasta? Yeah. And I'm always like, are you going to make some for your friends one day? Well, I'm like, come on, that's why you came to class. I want you to make it for your friends. That's why we have the wonderful class that you're coming to in January, the timpano class. Not only do you make that wonderful dish timpano that was in Big Night, but you make a seafood salad for 8 and you make dessert. So when you go home that day, you have your friends come over, you got a 3-course meal for 8 people, and you have a nice dinner party. People take that class and they email me back and they're like, wow, my friends think I can cook. We had so much fun. And that's what I want people to do. And I think if people do that, then, you sit around the dinner table and that's where the good conversation comes out. And I'm not talking about the same stories you might be telling. I'm talking about conversations and the civility in our country, I think, will come back because I think we lost a lot of that because people just go out and they go out for two people. You lead kind of an insular life. Maybe you go out with another couple. You know, let's go out in groups. Let's invite people to our house. Let's, have conversations. Let's be civil again. And I think it all starts with food.
Um, you worked in Hawaii years ago, and I actually covered the Hawaiian food scene years ago about Hawaii regional cuisine. And you worked for one of the top chefs in Hawaii, Peter Merriman, who I interviewed at his restaurant years ago. But what was your Hawaii experience like? I mean, they can grow everything there. They have such fresh food. What what did you learn? Anything you learned in Hawaii that you brought back to Chicago?
Oh, absolutely. Because I did work with Peter. He was the first chef I worked for out there, and I was his when he opened his first restaurant, I was his only cook he hired because he only could afford one cook. I was the only one willing enough and crazy enough to take that low of a pay to come work hard. But Peter was all about everything off the islands, and it was amazing. So it's honestly it's the Italian and French way of cooking. It's you're cooking local, so it's the same thing, but just done in Hawaii with their ingredients. So we would have farmers come over on Mondays, and they would come over in their pickup truck and give us a whole bunch of produce. Some of the stuff we'd never seen before, and we'd be like, okay, we're buying it off of you. We just got to figure out how to work with it and put it on as specials because we couldn't be in contact with these farmers because they were so rural, they didn't even have a telephone where they lived. So this was 1988, 89. They would bring us produce and we just would have to figure out, okay, we're going to put this on the menu. Let's work with it for a day or two and see how we can incorporate it into the menu. He would get two whole lambs in every week from the other side of the island. They would butcher it down and we'd have a lamb special every night. One night it might be lamb chops, the next night it might be lamb shoulder, next night it might be lamb leg. We never know what it would be. Or I would say the guests never knew what it would be. If they called us up and say, hey, when are you running, that you know, lamb chop special again, we might be like, oh, I don't know. We got to run out these other things first. It's not like every Wednesday was lamb chops and that. It was how things were running out. So yeah, it was just working with really fresh, great ingredients and letting them speak for themselves as opposed to like, you know, saying like I said, cooking in season, not trying to bring in asparagus in December and make it taste good. Working with stuff that was coming in that was just beautiful and tasty and not screwing it up. I mean, that's to me, that's the Italian way. That's the way Peter taught me how to cook. And that's the way I still try and do it.
Um, and again, we're going to go to the chat questions in a minute, but we've had you as our main course, and Gail, let's have Gail as our dessert course. Of course, Gail, you've won the James Beard Award as pastry chef of the nation. You've written so many cookbooks, and you were one of Chicago's biggest chefs with True Restaurant. Is there anything you might want to add to this talk tonight, and anything you might want to add as for our dessert course?
Of course, you can always count on me wanting to talk.
Yeah.
We also got a second James Beard Award for best service, so that, Dean was speaking about sort of elevating front of house, and I hope that I'm considered in that circle too, where we brought, sort of European style service to America. I've kind of two groups of thoughts. One is I just want to talk a little bit about teaching because it's mainly what I do now too, is teach cooking classes and just speak to how exciting they are for us as chefs and teachers because they really empower our students. I find that it like changes people's whole identity within their tribe once they like master that pie crust. And before they felt like they could never even, approach a pie crust. It really sort of changes their self-esteem and their self-worth. And, there's not that many things out there that can do that the way that cooking does. It really gives people a place to I think, be more intimate with friends and family, and connect in a way that's really personal. The other thing about cooking and teaching cooking is there's a lot of mental health aspects to it, with just doing something that has a beginning, middle, and end, and being successful at it. Endorphins are happening, and it really does help people feel better about their situation. So I really support what you're doing, Dean. I love that. While you were talking, a couple of the other things I thought of as you were reflecting on Chicago, one of the things we're famous for are these neighborhoods, these ethnic neighborhoods. There's Hungarian cuisine, there's Polish, and there's neighborhoods for it. But I think we've lost some of that. I think we still have the ethnic cuisines, like you mentioned, empanadas, and I was at a Croatian restaurant the other night, but I think they're not as neighborhood centric as they used to be. Like, you used to be able to go to a neighborhood and know that that cuisine was going to be there. Now we kind of have to seek it out. It's more sprinkled and salt and peppered throughout the city, but I think we are still really a strong ethnic restaurant city. The other thing is, I think what kind of happened with some of my generation of chefs is we came from untraditional backgrounds. So we weren't all chefs that like went to CIA and, went to culinary school and kind of, worked at Le Francais and worked our way up from a commis to whatever. Some of us came from art and from photography, and I think we got a broader range of people's backgrounds who became chefs. So that, I think that's part of why we got more creative in Chicago. I think we can't have this convo without mentioning Rich Melman and Let Us Entertain You, at least. He was he was
Yes,
some of the deep pockets behind some of these concepts that, allowed our chefs to go to Italy and eat the food and bring it back, like Avanzari, which was in the mid 80s, early 80s. Avanzari was showing us stuff that no one had ever seen before. And I do want to give a little cred there to Rich Melman and Let Us Entertain You. The other influences, I think Meals on Wheels was a really important one. The charity event that happened every year in Chicago,
right.
because they would, that's where I met Bobby Flay. Like, that's where I met Nancy Silverton. That event would bring in people from all over, chefs from all over the country, and allow us to meet these people and cook for these people while they were in town, and then get to go to their restaurants and get cooked for. So I think that was a big part of the exchange that was important for our growth. And the other thing was the Beard Awards came here. Like, that was kind of a big deal. I don't know that we celebrated as big as New York did, because I mostly went to the ones in New York. But the fact that the Beard Awards looked at Chicago and said, hey, here's an important culinary city. Let's move the awards there for 5 years. I think that that was really significant for us as
That
well.
was that really helped validate Chicago. That not that we
Yeah.
needed it in my eyes, but yeah, the Beer Awards coming here, that was huge.
Yeah.
It was.
So those were my thoughts. Not so much about dessert, Scott. I'm sorry.
No,
Um,
no, you're our cheesecake. You're our dessert course with your wonderful savory talk here.
Oh, thank you. But Dean, I would love to teach Italian desserts at your school if I could. My husband's Sicilian. My husband before that was, his parents were Napolitan and Abruzze. So I have a little background. So if you're
Yeah,
looking
we
for
could
a
work
pastry
something out.
chef, sorry to
It's
do
fun.
a job interview tonight, but love to come cook with
Networking.
you and do some desserts at your place.
I'm sure we could work it out.
Great, great.
And
And
I'll
nice
I'll
to see
sign
you.
up for that when you have her, Dean. So you got one customer
I got
already.
one student. Okay.
Yes, yes. And again, Jean Marie Brownson, are you still on tonight, dear? I'm just looking to see if you're still. Yes, Jean Marie. Sorry to put you on the spot, but Jean Marie, who's viewing right now, was the test kitchen director for the Tribune for years. And then she also went on to, I don't know if the word is partner with Rick Bayless and Frontera Foods, but do you, I mean, my God, you're such an eminent person. I've enjoyed reading you for years and knowing you. Uh, do you have anything you might want to add to about Chicago's revolution in food? And we'll see can she unmute herself here? Or-
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Scott.
Or any questions?
As I
you
was
might have.
thinking, part of what we did in Chicago, I started the Tribune in 1980, was really highlight everything the chefs were doing and the ingredients they were bringing in. And I remember, Carol Haddix was just a groundbreaking editor, and she just let us do whatever we wanted to do. We had 16 people in the food section when I started in 1980. And now it's not even it's a shadow of what it used to be. But we were allowed to go to France, go to Italy, cover all these things, so that we were very educated when we would interview the chefs, when we understood what was going on in Chicago. But people really started to say what we want to cook, what the chefs are cooking, what's happening, and people started to travel because of writing stories that were written in the Trib about different ethnic cuisines and the food of the different countries. And that sort of spurred on everyone's desire. I'm sure Arun personally sent a ton of people to Thailand to go eat everything that he was cooking, because they got a little taste of it here and they wanted to travel. And I think that's reflected today's cook and eater and restaurant goer. They're so sophisticated. I'm so impressed with what they know about different ingredients and what they're willing to try. And they might watch YouTube to figure out how to bone out a bird or something like that, rather than going through cookbooks and stuff these days. But we covered so much of the world back starting in the 80s to say what's going on in food. And I think that had a big influence. We were all at Bayless's restaurant the first 2 weeks he was open, and his book came out. We covered his restaurant and his book in the same week, to say this is what's going on. And I mean, at the time there were millions of readers for the newspaper. So I think that was huge, that for sort of pushing out the news into Chicagoans. And it was a gas. I went on a food writing trip to France. It had to be like 82, 83 maybe. And passion fruit was on every single dessert table of everywhere that I went. It was a great time to be in France because the dollar was worth a lot there. And I came back and I said, well, how do you get passion fruit in Chicago? And do you remember Frida Kaplan, who started Frida's Finest out in California, sent us a case of passion fruit to work with at the Tribune to say, how can we teach people about this fruit and what's going to happen, and what they're seeing at, Gail's restaurant or someone's restaurant, they're getting a passion fruit mousse or sorbet or something. And we wanted to show the readers what this was. And stuff like that was just super exciting for at the time, and I feel like I would just personally think newspapers are super important. It's still right for them. But to educate people, to show them the other side, and to have the time to interview the chefs that were in Chicago and profile them.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I think the Chicago restaurant scene has just gotten better and better and better. I mean, there was a time where, Chez Paul and the Italian Village were, the hallmarks of good food in Chicago. And while they were good, they're nothing like the creativity that's happening today, and the push the envelope, and the mixing up of cuisines, and the acceptance for things that are super authentic and super interesting. I'm just so pleased with what's going on in the Chicago restaurant scene.
Thank you for adding your special ingredient to this. We're getting a buffet tonight. We've had a main course of Dean, and now a dessert course with Gail, and a little a musée bouche, or what's it called, with Jean Marie. There's one other person here. There's a whole bunch of people here tonight who are so astounding in the food world. Madeline Bullwinkle. With what a name, but she was Bullwinkle, but she was Madeline was considered the Tribune voter, one of the top cooking teachers in Chicago, And Madeline was the one, hi Madeline, she was the
Hi.
one who,
Nice to see you.
and you're the one who called me years ago, over 30 years ago, and said, we're starting this group called the Culinary Historians of Chicago, and why
That's
don't
right.
you come join us? And I said, I don't know, it sounds a little academic. I don't think I'd fit in. So thank you. I guess I fit
No.
in. So, but and I still remember your pizza class that I took, your Chicago stuffed pizza, because Dean is teaching a class where a timpano class, which is the whole kitchen sink thrown into a dish, and your Chicago pizza class, even though you teach French cooking, that was one of the best classes I've ever had. But is there anything you might want to add about Chicago's food scene, the evolution, or any question you might have for Dean?
Well, I'm going to turn the conversation kind of on its head because as someone who is, I'm not a senior citizen anymore. I'm a older adult, okay? I live in the suburbs. I don't get down to the city so much. And frankly, the last time I ate at a well-known restaurant that has a Woodfield outlet, I won't mention its name, sharing a seafood salad and having a bowl of soup, no wine, just some coffee and water, cost $50. And that was a lot. And I'm not sure that the people, since I started as a high school graduate, as a waitress, I'm not sure the people up front get as much as they should. I know chefs are trying hard to make it. Their food costs are going up. It's still the best deal to cook at home. So I think what Dean is doing is great. I think what Gail is doing, I'm in my 47th year of teaching French cooking to home cooks. They work with me. Right now I'm doing online since COVID. I teach online, but interactive cooking is the most fun. It's a social event. It's a creative event, and people find out because it happens routinely. If something goes wrong, you learn how to fix it. So people learn resilience, they learn confidence. We sit down and we eat what we make, and the social benefits are huge. And that's how I've always tried to teach. And I came to the historians, Scott, because I was trained as an art historian. So when I started teaching, rather than go to the kitchen, I went to the library and I learned about the chemistry of bread. And I tried and I failed. And what I teach is why something happens as well as how to, so that people can solve their problems and they can master and gain confidence. Because every time you do something, it's different. So I really am glad to see that chefs, as well as us home teachers, are joining and trying to promote more eating well at home. Every time you pick up the newspaper, you listen to NPR, you read a magazine, you find out the adulteration in so much of the food that is made in a factory. Fresh is always the best. Organic, if you can afford it. But in season, I mean, it goes down to very simple things. Dean does Italian. The French live the same way. In fact, there's a kind of a battle between who did what first, the French or the Italians. But that's the way home cook can do it, and it isn't expensive. So that's my rant.
Thank you. A delicious rant. Thanks so much. Look, Dean, again, you're talking and you brought in a buffet of wonderful speakers tonight. And we're going to turn this over to the questions from our audience, and Kathy's going to read them. One question that I do see, can you please send links to all the cooking classes, including Madeline's? Kathy, is that doable, or?
Madeline, I just added your blog. Would that lead
Great.
into your cooking classes? Okay.
Yes.
If not, you could put into the chat additional addresses if you can.
I will be happy to. I also have the 4th edition of my fruit preserve cookbook that's been in print for 40 years, has
Wow.
just come out. And it includes not only the whole realm of preserving, but also has breads and desserts. And one of the people who are commenting on that book is Gail Gallant. So I know she's teaching preserves too.
You know, there's,
Yes.
oh, go ahead, Kathy.
I'm sorry, I was reading something and talking to myself. Hi, Gail. Okay, so want to go to questions or?
Oh, you know what? I thought of something else too. There's one other person here who's one of the key people in food in Chicago, and I don't know if she'll want to speak. She's not shy, but sometimes she doesn't want to speak. But one of the Chicago's best cooking teachers ever, who helped, I forget her title, it was culinary director or something for the city of Chicago, Judith
Judith.
Hines. Judith, is there anything you might want to add to this talk?
Judith, I'm coming to you. This is almost like, what's your life?
Yes.
You know? I'm sorry.
Hello
I'm
there.
enjoying this.
Hi, Judith.
Hi, this has been such fun. It's wonderful to see both of you guys. I've had all sorts of thoughts and flashbacks because when I started with the city in '96, it was my job to be the godmother to all the restaurants. And so I got to work with all of you and promote those restaurants. As my boss used to say, promote food any way you can. And we did all sorts of things. And I think a lot of your points have been covered absolutely but one of the things I want to point out that I used to say all the time, I used to have the opportunity to say all the time, the difference between Chicago chefs as a community and chefs everywhere else is that everybody in Chicago likes each other and works together. And I would pick up the phone and say, Gail, and a whole list of you, and I would say, this is what I need, and you all would say yes and do it and have a good time at it. And it wasn't competitive. I know many experiences where a restaurant would be full and somebody would say, well, check with them across the street, they have space, or they even call and make a reservation for you at some other restaurant. So everybody works together, and I don't know if that's still true because I'm not as connected to everybody, but it certainly was true, and it was a very Midwest thing. And it made a big difference in who we are in perception to the rest of the world and in how the restaurants operated and how popular they all were.
Thank
I
you.
missed you all.
Thanks, Judith. Again, we just heard from one of Chicago's greatest cooking teachers ever. So, and we will open this up to chat questions from our group here. And thank you for turning in the questions. Kathy, take it away.
Okay, so just at the very beginning, it's almost like a reconfirmation, but they wanted to know where you came from. And somebody said you came from New England in 2006. Is that about right?
No, before that. So I grew up in Massachusetts, a town called Framingham, Massachusetts. Went to work full time. Worked at the local Italian restaurant in the neighborhood. Went to school at UMass Amherst for management. Luckily, I worked full time on a really good chef up there who taught me a lot. And so I was going to college full time, working full time. And when I graduated and didn't know what I wanted to do, my chef just said, yeah, you know what you want to do because you got it here and here, and that's the most important part for cooking. So that's when I decided on a whim to fly to Hawaii and cook out there because I figured, if I'm going to be broke, the beaches are free. And, you know, I lived there. And so from 88 to 90, then I moved here in 1990. So I came from Massachusetts via Hawaii, but I moved out twice. I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming for 9 months, came back here, moved back to Hawaii, came back here.
I have a question for you. Now, you worked at Charlie Trotter's, didn't you?
Yes.
I once had dinner in the kitchen, which was quite interesting. But there was one point where he walked into the kitchen and there was a waiter holding the platter with the food, and he just stared at it and stared at it. And you could tell everybody who contributed any component to that plate was nervous. And then he went, okay. And then he walked away, and you could cut the tension with a knife. But once he left, wow, it was, joyful.
Yes, Charlie had a way about him, and you know, he had a lot of great in him. And but if you showed fear in his kitchen, he could smell that out. And unfortunately, sometimes he would use that against you in a way. Um, it depends what mood he was in. So some days he'd be in the teach mode, like I was talking about as a chef, and he'd come and he'd teach you and he'd work with you. We all knew his standards were up here, but some days he would just. I drew a picture once and I said, "Okay, here's the plate how the chef wants it," and I put it up the very next day, exactly how he wanted. And he goes, "This is not right," and he's yelling at me. I go, "But chef, here's the dish," and he goes, "That was yesterday." But he didn't tell me the new way he wanted the dish. So I had
Oh
to
my God.
try and create the dish with the same ingredients and make it look different that was acceptable to him. And because I never like backed down from the challenge or that, we always got along. You know, if I made a mistake, I owned up to it. Um, you know, he liked that. You know, he liked the fact that you would own up to mistakes, not trying to hide it. Chef, I did this wrong. Chef, I did this. You know, just he appreciated that, I think, more so than some of these people that had feared that if they made a mistake, they'd try to hide it. He'd eventually catch it, and then it would snowball and get bigger. So, yeah, Charlie could really create tension when he wanted to.
It was astonishing. Now, I also was at Moto with Omaro Cantu. And if you were there during the formal restaurant hours, if you were visiting the kitchen, you felt like you were in a laboratory. But I was there as a 1 day stage, rock music playing, everybody's very relaxed and joking with each other. But when it was, you know, time on or,
Service
big
different.
show, it was very, very different. But it was fun too. It
Yeah.
was fun. Um, Okay, now we have some visitors actually from California. So they have some questions, which is relative to their. But he said, are there any historic or legacy restaurants in Chicago within a 25-mile radius that have survived, say, 100 years? There's not too many, but they're there.
100 years. That I'm not that old. Um,
Berghoff, sort of. I'm trying to help if that's helpful.
yeah. Like
Italian Kitchen.
the Italian Village, hasn't that been around
Sorry. Yeah.
forever?
That's what I meant to say.
How long has Margie's Candies been around? It's not really a restaurant per se, but it's
At
an
least from the
institution.
30s, I think.
Yeah, that
At least from the
but
30s.
yeah, a lot of them that were around for a lot of years closed in the 90s, and you know, all those great German restaurants that seemed to in Deutsche Neck and um was the Golden Ox, they were around forever. And all those big German restaurants seemed to close. Um Trying to think what other legacy restaurants that have been around
Well,
forever.
there's Daly's on the south side, but that's a more of a like a diner type place.
Yeah, but for like institutions, Berghoff might be the oldest one, I'd say.
Perhaps. Perhaps. Um, Oh, by the way, when there was that discussion about how friendly the people were, Gail pointed out that they shared employees and borrowed ingredients from each other.
Yeah, we that is true about our Chicago chefs. We do generally get along. I mean, I remember one time, I think it was back in 2001, I was doing a cooking event down in Disney World of all places, Epcot Center. I was allowed to bring a sous chef, but I couldn't bring one of my sous chefs. I didn't have that much staff. If I did that, who's going to run the kitchen while I was gone for 3 days? So my friend John Hogan, one of the best chefs in Chicago, happened to be like, "Hey, I got some time off." I'm like, "You want a free trip to Florida?" He's like, "Sure, why not?" I'm like, "You're gonna have to work, and you're gonna have to work for me." He's like, "Absolutely, let's go." When we were down there, we bumped into other chefs, Michael Schlau from Boston and some other chefs, and they're like, "Wow, we don't have that in the city." And I'm like, "What? Like you chefs getting along the way you guys do? Like he's coming to help you." And I'm like, "Well, I've helped him at events in Cincinnati." He's like, "Yeah, we would never do that in Boston. A few of us get along and we have little cliques, but I'm like, no, pretty much all of us in Chicago get along. I mean, I never felt that competition with other chefs or other restaurants. I maybe envied them if I thought they were better than me. And then I'm like, okay, I got to up my game and I love what they're doing. So how can I do something similar to that without stealing it straight up? So it elevates my restaurant or my food. And there were times where I would be doing a menu change and I'd have a block. I might call a chef, whether it was John Hogan or Al Sternweiler or some of the other great chefs in the city that I'm friends with, Sean McLean, and be like, "Hey, I'm thinking of this dish, and I'm just, what do you think of this and that?" And it bounce ideas off them. They come back and be like, try this," and I come up with menu ideas, and they do the same thing with me. And I think it's just it's much better, and I think it makes for better food as a whole in our city to be like friendly and be a little competitive, but not competitive to the point where I have to have a better restaurant than them because I'm better than they are. No, I want to be better than them just because I want to be better. But if they happen to be better than me, then I need to up my game. And we're friends, and I hope they succeed.
And
It's still
competition helps.
competition helps, and it
Competition
still
helps.
bothers me when I see restaurants closing. I might not even know the chef, and I'll read something like this restaurant closing. I'm like, too bad, because the people put their heart and effort into it. Nobody opens a restaurant and say, I'm going to work 20 hours a week, and if it closes, it closes. Nobody does that.
Since you probably touch pizza, so this again is somebody from California, but they go, where does deep dish pizza stand? Still there or gone? It's still here, but
It's still here. Um, I'm not a big fan of it personally. I didn't grow up in Chicago, so I don't mind it like once a year. I just, after going to Italy and eating the great pizza over there as much as I have, that's where my heart is. I think a friend of mine once said, there's two pizzas in your life, the one you grew up loving and the one you grow into loving. And so, yeah, there's a pizza in my neighborhood. I love it back east. My mom still lives in the house my dad was born in. I go home, I always get it. Many people go, really? You like that? I'm like, I grew up with it. I love it. I didn't grow up here in Chicago, so I'm not a big fan of tavern style pizza or deep dish pizza. I don't knock it. It's just not what I grew up with. I didn't come to grow to love it. I like more than Napolitana pizza. You know, it's
makes
just
sense.
different.
Has there been an influx again from California? Sorry, but has there been an influx of new international cuisines in Chicago at all? For example, the new Nordic influence that seems to be streaming from the likes of Noma and Favikan. And maybe there's no
Yeah.
answer there. I don't know.
Well, I don't know about Nordic, but as Gail mentioned, we're getting elevated cuisines that aren't necessarily the same ones we used to see. So, um, what's there's a Ukrainian restaurant now that's getting a lot of press. There's that restaurant that just got really good reviews. Oh my God, it's a fusion between like Mexican and another one that you didn't think would work, and it's working
Korean?
really well too. What's that?
Was it Korean?
Yes,
I don't
and
remember
like
the name, but I know what you're talking about.
So yeah, there's a lot of different influxes coming in that the Nordic, we did have a restaurant for a while there that was getting some of those influences. I think it closed. It was right before the pandemic and it had really good reviews. And I can't remember the name of it. But yeah, we're always getting new ideas here in Chicago. It's not the stale.
Okay, here's a question. As limited income elders, we are prioritizing home cooking, Mexican Cuban style, more sustainable using organic foods. I guess that's more of a comment, but sorry about that.
No,
By the way,
that's great.
Madeline, go ahead.
No, that's great. I mean, I love the fact that people are cooking at home and you know, again, Gail mentioned it, I mentioned it. Cooking is to have somebody over your house to cook them food. It's very intimate. It's saying a lot about, hey, this is who I am, and come into my house. I'm willing to share with you. I think that's wonderful.
I There was a question here about Le Francais and wondering why did they close? If you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, sheesh. You know, why did La Francais close? I think restaurants all have a shelf life. Some of them are a shooting star. It might be 2, 3 years. For whatever reason, they get a lot of accolades and, they just kind of burn out. Maybe their chef burnt out or whatever. La Francais was on the top of the game for a long time. I think a lot of the reason, personally, I think the reason they went away was its location because it was such a destination restaurant. And a lot of great restaurants here in Chicago were opening up. They were doing the tasting restaurants. Back in the 80s, early 90s, they were one of what, 6 to 8 restaurants that were doing tasting menus in Chicago and around Chicago. And, now there's 20, 30 restaurants that do tasting menus and they're great. So people weren't like, oh, now we got to get a driver to go out there if we're going to drink because that whole drinking and driving stuff for now. So why don't we just go over here because the tasting menu here is going to be great and we can just take a cab. I think that had a lot to do with it. There was just a lot more options for tasting menus and a lot more options closer to the people who live in Chicago.
Somebody commented who knew him fairly well. She said Jean Blanchet retired, and when he left, no one could stay at the level as he was working.
Well, yes, but I ate at La Francais after Jean Blanchet left and Roland was the chef. And
Yep.
I thought it was wonderful. I mean, I didn't eat, I came to Chicago after he retired, so I can't say that, how his food was, and I'm sure it was great and amazing. But you know, it was a wonderful meal when I ate there, so I have nothing bad to say. I think it could be a combination of that too, you know. He was widely considered one of the best chefs in the country at the time.
You mentioned differences between academically trained and apprentice chefs, the latter being more creative, question mark?
Well, since I didn't go to culinary school, I'll say yes. Um, I don't think so. I know people that went to culinary school, they come out and they're super creative. Um, I think it depends on the person. I do think if you're academically trained, you might know what all the rules are, and sometimes you're afraid to break them per se. Whereas if you're not academically trained, you might not know what all the rules are and accidentally break them and come up with a great dish. Um, no, I don't think. I think it helps if you who you are. Like Gail said, you have an artist who's drawn to cooking and they become good at it. Well, are they good at it because they were an artist, or did their artist side allow their dishes to change a little bit and become better? Or, if they went to culinary school, would they have been even better quicker? I don't know the answer to that. I don't think education's ever a bad thing. However, that being said, I do tell people I don't think you should go to culinary school because you come out with such a mountain of debt. And the problem with that is not what the school teaches you, is not the learning, the teaching and all that, is the mountain of debt you come out and you're still not at even a sous chef level. So how do you dig out from that debt? So if you can afford to go to culinary school, yeah. But if you're going to go in there, you're going to come out with $50,000 to $100,000 in debt. Don't do it. You're not going to dig yourself out. I would rather somebody save their money, work as a prep cook as their first job, learn line cook, whatever, stay at their parents, save some money, then travel for a year or two, with the money they saved and find out what cuisine they might love. I grew up doing Italian, but when I moved to Hawaii, I convinced myself I was going to learn Thai food and go to Southeast Asia, and that would be amazing. My career path took me different. I'm glad it did. I love Italian cuisine, but if things had changed just a little bit, I might have been the next Arun.
Yeah, you just never know. Now, here's a question. It's again from our friends in California. They asked about Professor Anthony Buccini. Do you happen to know him?
I do not.
That's okay. He's somebody that I happen to know. I come from the, website, food chat websites from let's say, for the last 20 years. And he was very, very involved. And a lot of people learned a lot of stuff from him, but I'm not quite sure what he did. I'll ask around. Translated to the culinary community beyond in Chicago, though he's very good, very interesting gentleman. But I don't think, I don't think. Oh, by the way, Jean Marie Brownson mentioned she's a Le Francais was also groundbreaking because of the location. At the time, excellent suburban restaurants were not common. Now they are. Think of Gigi's Bistro in Barrington, Shinshan Ramen in Palatine, and all the excellent places on the North Shore.
Yeah.
Things evolve. Things evolve. And Jean Marie also highlighted, like these large ethnic grocery stores like H Mart and I'm sorry, I've lost my place, but we really do have a variety of foodstuffs here that is just unbelievable. I mean, I remember once being asked to make something with key lime pie, and I thought I was going to spend all day looking for key limes. And the first Mexican grocery I went into, I bought a bag of key limes for $2, which is just phenomenal. And it's what's nice is because we are at a transportation hub, just a lot of stuff shows up here and relatively inexpensive. Madeline Bullwinkle would like to give a shout out to the Ethiopian restaurant Deemer's, whose woman owner is Tigris Reda. I hope I pronounced that right. Well, I think there's always so much more to say here, so much more. But I have a feeling, Scott, I think it's time to wrap things up.
Yes, we've just had our final course. So thank you all for tuning in to us. And thank you for our contributors, our illustrious contributors tonight to the program. And thank you, Dean, so much. And I will see you next month at the cooking class that I've signed up for.
Great.
So can't wait.
Looking forward to it. You'll have fun.
I know I will. Take care. And again,
Take care.
keep on cooking.
Thanks, man. Have a great day, everybody.